They told you these stories were fiction. That tales of brothers marrying sisters only belonged in dusty myth or broken kingdoms long dead. But what if I told you one of the most disturbing unions in American history didn't happen centuries ago? It happened here, in the modern South, in a town no map wants to mark, where a woman married her brother and called it love. You weren't meant to hear this, because once you do, you can't unknow it. Her name was Gracie Whitaker. Her bloodline was already frayed before she was born. Her parents were double cousins, meaning the same faces, the same eyes, the same genetic code, recycled, mutated, intensified, and Gracie didn't escape it. She became the epicenter of it. Because in that Appalachian silence, where roads stopped and doctors never came, she married her own blood. Her double cousin. Her almost twin, genetically. Together, they had 15 children. Most never learned to speak. Some never even learned to walk. One could only grunt. Their faces carried the same features, the same abnormalities, the same cost of repeating what should never be repeated. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is that no one intervened. Not the state. Not the neighbors. Not even time. Because this wasn't just an accident. This was a system. A closed loop of silence. A deliberate omission from history. And while the rest of America moved forward, this family stayed frozen. Trapped in time. Trapped in blood. Gracie never left her town. She never spoke to the press. And when she died, the silence only deepened. Her children remained, wandering that same land, with the same eyes, the same scars, the same fate. This is not about shame. This is about truth. And truth, once unearthed, never goes back underground. You've just stepped into the threshold. The door is open now. And what's coming next will challenge every assumption you've been fed. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what happens when the same blood circles back into itself? When nature's design is ignored, not once, not twice, but generation after generation. The result isn't just deformity. It's spiritual collapse. Gracie Whitaker wasn't the beginning. She was a result, a consequence born from decades of insular breeding, old loyalties, and twisted survival. In Appalachia, the mountains don't just hold echoes. They hold secrets. You see, her parents were cousins. But their parents were twin brothers. That means her genetic code was almost a mirror, a perfect storm of inherited mutations with nowhere to run. No fresh blood. No way out. And yet, Gracie didn't break the cycle. She deepened it. She married John Emery Whitaker, her double cousin. A man whose DNA was practically indistinguishable from her own. Not by chance, but by design. Because in those isolated backwoods, purity didn't mean what you think it did. It meant containment, a legacy guarded by silence. They didn't just pass on their name. They passed on everything. Every flaw. Every disorder. Every neurological glitch. Engraved in the bones of their children. But why? Why would a family choose to live this way? Because sometimes, people don't choose at all. They're programmed. Generation after generation, conditioned to believe that outside is evil, that difference is danger. It's psychological inbreeding, just as toxic as the biological kind. That's the real sickness. Not just genes, but control. A control passed through blood, reinforced by fear, and hidden beneath layers of denial. And what happens when a child is born from that system? They're not just biologically broken. They are symbolically imprisoned. Born into a legacy they can't escape, a name they didn't choose, and a body that betrays them from the moment they open their eyes. That's not family. That's a closed system. And all closed systems eventually rot. Gracie's story isn't rare. It's just well hidden. And now, I'm going to take you deeper, past the myths, past the stories, into the exact moment this system cracked. But before we descend, comment this below twice to lock yourself in. Ho, I see through the blood, ho. Ho, I see through the blood, ho. You'll understand why, by the end. In the hills of West Virginia, time doesn't just slow, it folds. That's where the story turns from tragic to forbidden. You've heard whispers of cousin marriages in Appalachia. But what if I told you the truth was darker? Not cousins, not even double cousins, but siblings, not in name, in blood. Two people, born from the same lineage, who were never meant to fall in love. But in the suffocating silence of isolation, the lines blurred, and what was unthinkable became inevitable. Her name was Laureen. His name isn't recorded, because the family burned the birth certificates, buried the memories, and denied the truth until it was too late. Laureen was the child of Gracie and John, born into a genetic loop that had already begun to collapse. But her brother, quiet, unassuming, shadow-like, lived just steps away. Same roof, same blood, same silence. There were no schools nearby, no visitors, no friends, just voices inside the house, and the whispers no one dared speak out loud. It started small. A shared room. A game played too long. A touch that should have been stopped. But there was no one to stop it. No one to say, this is wrong. Because when everyone shares the same name, the same blood, morality becomes a mirror. You only see what you've been shown. And what they were shown was nothing. No love. No light. Just survival. By 1962, Laureen was pregnant. There was no hospital, no records, just the midwife, who was paid in silence. The baby was born without a name. Facial deformities, clubbed feet. One eye permanently turned inward, like it couldn't bear to look at the world it was brought into. The father disappeared within a year. Some say he left. Others say the family handled it. Appalachia has ways of swallowing its own sins. Laureen never spoke of it. In fact, she barely spoke at all. Most of her life was spent humming to herself in a rocking chair, clutching a single doll, a plastic baby she named Grace. The real baby? Dead by age 3. But this isn't just about one family. This is systemic silence, wrapped in Christian platitudes, protected by poverty, and reinforced by generational fear. And while Laureen rocked in her chair, the next cycle began. This wasn't just incest. It was ritualized containment. Not everyone stays silent forever. There was one, just one, who tried to leave the blood behind. Her name was Ruth. Gracie's granddaughter. Laureen's niece. She was born different. Not in body, in mind. Even as a child, she asked questions that no one else dared. Why don't we go to school? Why do we never leave the property? Why does Uncle sleep in my room? They didn't like that. They called her difficult. Said the devil had gotten into her head. But Ruth knew better. She'd seen too much. She found an old newspaper under the porch once. A real one, not soaked in grease or used for kindling. The headline was about a missing girl. A girl who looked just like her. That was the moment it clicked. The world outside wasn't just bigger. It was real. At 14, Ruth ran. She made it 19 miles on foot before a truck driver picked her up near the state line. He bought her a meal, listened to her story, and called the sheriff. That was her mistake. Because in these parts, the sheriff knows the family. And the family knows where the bodies are buried. They didn't take her home. They took her somewhere worse. A youth home 2 towns over, run by a church, fenced with rusted wire. The kind of place that doesn't ask questions. The kind of place where lost girls go to become forgotten women. For 2 years, Ruth lived among drug addicts, abused runaways, and girls who stared blankly at the walls. Every time she told her story, about her mother's brother being her father, about the babies that didn't live past infancy, they wrote it down as delusion. Delusional disorder. That's what they called it. Not evidence. Not a cry for help. A diagnosis. And just like that, The truth was buried again, this time under paperwork. Ruth was released at 17. No diploma. No family. No identity. She changed her name, moved to Ohio, and never looked back. But at 33, alone, jobless, on the brink of eviction, she wrote it all down. In a letter mailed to a journalist in Lexington. It was unsigned, unverified, but every detail matched the files the state tried to seal. That letter was leaked in 2007. Most people thought it was fiction. But you know better now, don't you? Because what Ruth discovered is this. When you try to escape the blood, the system doesn't let go. In most families, a family tree grows up, but in odd, West Virginia, it grew in circles. By the time Ruth escaped, the Whitaker bloodline had already collapsed in on itself, a spiral of uncorrected unions, concealed abuse, and rituals no one outside the mountains would believe. You think incest is just a taboo? No. In this family, it was a survival mechanism. The world forgot them, so they turned inward. Generation after generation, they married what was available. But it didn't start with Gracie. It started much earlier. Back in the 1870s, when coal mining families were first dropped into the hills by corporate railroads. No schools. No churches. Just labor camps and pay in tokens. There was one man, Edgar Whitaker, whose name was stamped on half the land. A patriarch who controlled food, shelter, and daughters like livestock. He believed bloodlines were sacred, that outsiders diluted strength. He taught his sons that keeping it in the family wasn't just acceptable, it was divine order. You won't find that in a history book. You'll find it in death records. In birth defects no doctor dared write down. In gravestones with the same last name etched over and over again. Husband, wife, brother, sister. By the 1940s, the genetic echo chamber was no longer rumor. Children were born with fused toes, sloping foreheads, wandering eyes, and cognitive delays so severe they couldn't recognize mirrors. Yet no one intervened. Why? Because in America, there are places designed to disappear. Places where social workers forget to follow up. Where judges don't issue warrants. Where funding dries up and reports get lost in a filing cabinet behind a locked door. You think this family was a one-off? Look closer. From West Virginia to the Ozarks to the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, there are entire communities where incest isn't deviation, it's tradition. Ritualized. Hidden in faith. Whispered in kitchens. Carried out in barns and bedrooms. And the system doesn't stop it, because the system created it. It gave them the land. It took their schools. It closed their roads. It watched them turn on themselves, and said nothing. That's the real horror. Not just what happens inside the family, but what happens when the outside world knows, and walks away. And if you're still watching, type this in the comments, twice. Blood speaks in silence. It tells the algorithm you're not afraid to see the truth. His name was Elijah Poe. He wasn't from Odd. He wasn't related to the Whitakers. But he died for what he found buried under their name. In 1993, Elijah was just a local social worker, sent to follow up on a routine welfare check in the hills near Raleigh County, West Virginia. He thought it would be a dead end, a broken mailbox, a missed appointment. What he walked into was something he never talked about again. Not publicly, but in his private journal, found 2 years after his death, he wrote this. They live in pairs. Brother and sister. Uncle and niece. Babies with no names. Women who can't speak. No one cries. No one talks. They just watch. Elijah tried to file a report. It was suppressed. He tried to escalate. He was reassigned. He didn't stop. Over the next 6 months, he started collecting names. Photographs. Maps of family plots that circled back on themselves. He requested state-level genetic testing. Denied. He reached out to a friend at the Charleston Gazette. Ghosted. Even his own supervisor told him, drop it. They're not hurting anyone important. But Elijah understood what most people never grasp. When a family is built on silence, truth becomes a threat. And someone wanted him quiet. In April of 1995, Elijah's car was found at the bottom of a ravine. Doors locked, windows shattered, ignition off. They said he'd fallen asleep at the wheel. But his wife knew better. He never drove that road. And he never left his files behind. Yet every document he'd gathered, gone. His journals? His cassette recordings? Only fragments remained, handwritten pages buried in a crawlspace beneath their home. One of those pages read, "If I disappear, it's because I found the root. And the root bleeds." After his death, no further visits were made to the Whitaker property for over a decade. No new reports filed. No investigations launched. The silence returned. Only now, you've heard the whisper he tried to scream. Understand this. Elijah wasn't just a man who cared. He was a man who got too close to a truth the system doesn't prosecute, because it protects it. They call it keeping the blood. Not a phrase you'll find in textbooks or family Bibles, but whispered, generation to generation, in the hollers of West Virginia and the dirt-floored attics of the forgotten South. It wasn't just about isolation, not just about poverty or ignorance. It was a belief, a code, that said, the outside world contaminates. Only blood keeps us strong. Some say it started as survival. Others say it was control. But deep inside the Whitaker legacy, there was a ritual, and it was never written down. A child born with certain features, wide-set eyes, fused fingers, webbed toes, wasn't seen as a mistake. They were seen as proof. The blood was working. Those who questioned it, silenced, buried, or bred out. Neighbors knew. Some saw the gatherings, candles lit in barns at night, elders whispering in a language that wasn't quite English. They heard the stories of babies who didn't cry, and mothers who were never allowed to leave the house. There were rules. No outsiders. No schools. No doctors. And if someone strayed, like a cousin who dared date a boy from Ohio, she disappeared. Her name scratched off a headstone. Her birth record torn in half. This wasn't just incest. This was lineage worship. A belief that by folding the same blood again and again, they weren't weakening the line, they were perfecting it. A family made into a loop. No exits. No entries. Just them. Some families do this with money. Some with power. The Whitakers did it with blood. And today, they're still there. Tucked in trailers built beside crumbling houses. Living in loops of silence, addiction, and confusion. No phone. No Wi-Fi. Just echoes. And we let it happen. Because the system is designed to ignore them. Because their story is too ugly for politics. Too complicated for justice. Too ancient for the news. But not for you. Now you know. And once you know, you can't unsee it. Because behind every smiling photo, behind every forgotten town, there's a secret we were never meant to hear. A family that never left the past behind. And somewhere in the dark, they still believe. Keeping the blood is keeping the power.